This is the story of the one. As head of maintenance at a concert hall, he knows the show must always go on. That's why he works behind the scenes, ensuring every light is working, the HVAC is humming, and his facility shines. With Grainger's supplies and solutions for every challenge he faces, plus 24/7 customer support, his venue never misses a beat. Call quickgrainger.com or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Is in America, where the road goes quiet, where legends still breathe, and where the line between truth and folklore blurs. From haunted highways and cryptid sightings to stories that have echoed through generations, State of the Unknown takes you deep into the shadows of America's strangest corners. Hosted by Rob, this documentary-style podcast blends immersive storytelling with real research to uncover the tales that refuse to fade. If you like your mysteries murky and your folklore just a little too real, you might already be living in the state of the unknown. Listen now wherever you get your podcasts.
How do you know who you are? Is it the name that you've always answered to? The memories you carry? Or the roles you've learned to play? Most people assume identity is something stable, something that stays fixed no matter the setting. But for some, it does shift. Not in sudden breaks, but in quiet, gradual turns. One version for the public, another for private. And somewhere in between, maybe a third that no one sees. Can you forget who you are and not even know it happened? What if the memories you trust most aren't yours at all, but something you absorbed, invented, or chose to believe? When pieces of your past go missing, does that person you become belong to someone else entirely? And if you decide to forget, willingly, what does that make you?
Welcome to Down the Crooked Path. I'm your host, Amanda Joy. Join me as we dive into eerie and spine-chilling stories that blur the lines between reality and the unknown. From cryptids and mysterious disappearances to true crime, UFO sightings, and paranormal activity. Venture into the unknown and uncover the secrets that lie down the crooked path.
There are lives built on borrowed memories, stories told without conviction that no one else recalls. Sometimes, the truth isn't lost, it's replaced. Today we stepped into the blurred space between identity and invention, a place where memory cannot be trusted and truth is a matter of performance. Who was John Fritz Johnson? In May of 1957, a man arrived in Omaha, Nebraska. He walked into the Round Table Bar at 19th and Harney Streets and asked if they were hiring. The woman behind the bar, Betty Augustine, was working that day. She later described him as well-dressed, confident, and fascinating. He introduced himself as John Fritz Johnson. He was hired as a bartender, and within days, the regulars began referring to him as Fritz, a nickname that quickly stuck. Charismatic and quick-witted, he had a natural ease with people that made him more than just someone who poured drinks. He was a performer, a presence. His stories, rich with details and conviction, painted vivid pictures of a childhood spent in a Boston orphanage and 13 years in the Navy. Whether every word was true didn't seem to matter. He spoke with such confidence that no one questioned him. Patrons gravitated towards him, drawn not only by the drinks but by the magnetic energy he brought to the bar. Fritz didn't stay behind the bar for long. His personality caught the attention of local media, and he transitioned into radio. First as an announcer for KBON, and from there he moved on to television, eventually becoming the sports director at KETV Channel 7. He stood out on screen. His segments were upbeat and unconventional. He hosted a feature called Good News of the Day, where he refused to report anything negative, and viewers responded to his optimism and eccentricities. Around town, he drove a hearse that he had converted into a personal vehicle. Inside, he installed pillows, a coffee bar, and even an incense burner. The city licensed it as a hunting vehicle, and he used it to take women out on dates and to make an entrance at public events. It became sort of part of his image. Fritz was seen at fundraisers, community events, and publicity stunts. He once perched on a flagpole for 30 days to raise money for polio research. He was photographed, interviewed, and celebrated. In Omaha, he was a local celebrity. People knew his name, recognized his car, and turned in to watch him on TV. In 1961, John Fritz Johnson married Nancy Zimmer. She was 20 years old, a divorcee, and worked as a photographer's model. The two met during Fritz's rising popularity in Omaha, where he had become a very recognizable figure. Their relationship moved quickly, and after the wedding, Fritz adopted Nancy's daughter from her previous marriage, and not long after that, they had a son of their own together. Fritz embraced family life with the same energy he brought to his public persona. He remained active in the community and continued appearing at events, but at home, he was a husband and a father. He kept tropical fish and had a particular interest in Siamese fighting fish. He spoke about them often and maintained his tanks at home. In 1964, Fritz was diagnosed with a malignant tumor behind his left eye. The news was serious. He underwent surgery and the eye was removed. Afterward, he began to wear an eye patch. It wasn't a temporary measure. It became part of his look. He didn't hide it. He wore it on television, in public, and at events. It added to his presence, and it was something that people remembered. By the diagnosis, Fritz didn't retreat. He remained active, continued working, and stayed visible in the public community. He said that the surgery had weakened his back, and that's why he took up archery, something he fully invested in. Within 5 weeks, he won the Nebraska State Archery Championship. And he didn't just compete, he gave demonstrations. A Nebraska archery firm sent him to sport shows to represent their equipment. Lawrence Joseph Bader was born December 2, 1926, in Akron, Ohio. His father was a dentist, and the family lived in a well-established neighborhood. In 1944, while still attending Akron's Central High School, Bader enlisted in the U.S. Navy and served for 2 years during World War II. After his discharge, he enrolled in the University of Akron, but left after completing only 1 semester. Later, he worked as a cookware salesman for Reynolds Metal Corporation. He was known to be personal and persuasive, traits that served him well in sales. Colleagues described him as someone who could hold a conversation for hours and keep people engaged. He earned a decent salary, but by the mid-1950s, Bader was in financial trouble. He owed approximately $20,000 to the IRS and had not filed taxes for 5 years. He was also behind on other bills and under pressure from creditors. On April 19, 1952, Bader married Mary Lou Knapp. She had also attended the University of Akron, and the couple settled into Akron's West Hills neighborhood. They had 3 children together and were expecting a 4th by 1957. Mary Lou managed the household while Bader worked full-time. She was aware of the financial strain but said that he had assured her that he was handling it. On April 15, 1957, Bader told Mary Lou that he was headed to Cleveland for a business trip. He planned to pay a few bills and take care of work-related errands. Before leaving, he mentioned that he might stay an extra day to go fishing. Mary Lou asked him to come straight home, but he said he needed the break. Once in Cleveland, Bader cashed a $400 check and made payments on several accounts. Then he went to Eddie's Boathouse, which was operated by Lawrence Coulter, and asked to rent a boat. A storm was approaching and Coulter was reluctant to let him go out. Bader insisted and requested extra lights be put on the boat. After some negotiation, Coulter agreed and prepared the vessel. Bader had brought a suitcase with him. It was noticed by witnesses on the dock before he launched, and the Coast Guard approached him and warned him again about the incoming storm. He acknowledged the warning and continued with his plan. The boat left the dock and he headed out onto Lake Erie. The weather was deteriorating, the winds were picking up, visibility was dropping, and Bader didn't return. The following morning, his rented 14-foot boat was found washed ashore near Perkins Beach on Lake Erie's shoreline. The hull was scraped and the propeller was bent, damage consistent with having struck submerged rocks. One oar was missing while the other remained in place. The boat's lights were still on and the gas line had been disconnected. Inside, fishing tackle was scattered across the wet floor. Both life jackets were still on board and unused, and the suitcase that Batter had carried with him was gone. There was no sign of Batter himself. The Coast Guard launched a search, and rescue teams combed the lake and surrounding areas. Aircraft was deployed, divers were sent out, but no body was recovered. The storm that had rolled in the night before had produced strong winds and rough waters. Officials believed that the boat had capsized at one point, or that Batter had been thrown overboard. The search continued for several days, but it yielded no results. The boat itself was returned to Eddie's boathouse, and Lawrence Coulter, the owner, confirmed the damage and the missing oar. He reinstated that he had been reluctant to rent the boat to Batter in the first place due to the weather conditions, and the Coast Guards eventually filed the report and closed the case as a presumed drowning. Mary Lou remained in Akron with her children, navigating life as a single mother in the wake of her husband's disappearance. With no body recovered and no trace of Lawrence after the boat was found, she was left to manage the household alone. Over the next 3 years, she received Social Security payments, modest support that helped sustain the family but came with limitations. Because Lawrence had not filed his taxes properly, the benefits were slightly reduced. Eventually, she collected his life insurance policy. The payout offered some financial relief, though it came only after a lengthy legal process. In 1960, following repeated filings and no evidence of survival, the Summit County Probate Court declared Lawrence Batter legally dead. The declaration allowed Mary Lou to move forward, at least on paper. She removed her wedding ring, settled into the role of widow, and focused on raising her 4 children. But the story was far from over. February 2, 1965, John Fritz Johnson was in Chicago representing a Nebraska archery firm at the National Sporting Goods Show held at the McComrick Place. He was demonstrating equipment, speaking with the attendees, and performing trick shots. He wore his usual eye patch and a neatly trimmed mustache, so his booth drew attention. Among the crowd was a man from Akron. He paused when he saw Fritz. The face was familiar. He believed he had just seen Lawrence Batter, a man who had been declared legally dead 5 years earlier. The man contacted Batter's niece, Susan Pica, who lived in Chicago. He told her to come to the convention center immediately. Suzanne arrived and approached Fritz during a break in the demonstration. She asked him directly, "Are you my Uncle Larry Batter?" And Fritz replied that he was not. He said that his name was John Johnson, but his friends called him Fritz. He said that he had never heard of Lawrence Batter. But Susan wasn't convinced. She contacted Larry's brothers in Akron and told them what she had seen. They flew to Chicago, and when they arrived and saw Fritz in person, they were certain that he was their brother Larry. Fritz continued to deny that he was Lawrence Batter. He said that he had never lived in Akron and had no memory of anyone named Mary Lou. He insisted that his name was John Johnson, born and raised in Boston, and that he had served 13 years in the Navy. He said that he had lost his eye in cancer and had moved to Omaha for a fresh start. Despite his denial, he agreed to be fingerprinted. The prints were taken by the Chicago police and sent to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. There, the FBI compared them to Lawrence Batter's Navy records. The match was exact. The fingerprints confirmed that John Fritz Johnson was, in fact, Lawrence Joseph Batter. Mary Lou Batter was at home in Akron when she received the call. Her husband, whom she'd had declared legally dead, had been found alive in Chicago. She described the moment as shell-shocked. She had raised their 4 children alone. She had buried him in court. She had accepted insurance payouts. She had relied on Social Security benefits, and she had never remarried. Now the insurance payout Mary Lou had received after her husband's disappearance was under review. The policy had been processed in full following his legal declaration of death in 1960. With Lawrence Batter confirmed alive, the company launched an investigation into whether the payout had been issued in error or if it was all an elaborate scam. Mary Lou had used the money to support her 4 children. She relied on it for housing, food, and medical care, and she hadn't remarried. She had not worked full-time during those years. Those funds had been essential. Attorneys representing the insurance company reviewed the timeline of Batter's disappearance and the court's declaration of death and the circumstances surrounding his reappearance. The policy had been issued shortly after he vanished. The premium had been paid in Cleveland the same day that he rented the boat. That detail raised concern. Investigators examined whether the disappearance had been intentional and whether the payout had been obtained under false pretenses. The IRS also reopened its case. Lawrence Bader had owed approximately $20,000 in unpaid taxes at the time of his disappearance, and he had not filed his taxes for 5 years, and that debt was unresolved. The agency reviewed his employment records, his financial activity in Omaha, and the legal implications of his reappearance. The name John Fritz Johnson did not exist in their system, and yet the fingerprints matched Lawrence Bader, so the case was active. When the truth of identity came out, Nancy was confronted with a reality that she had never imagined. The man that she had married was not who he claimed to be. He was not John Fritz Johnson. He was Lawrence Joseph Bader, a man declared legally dead. Nancy had no prior connection to Akron. She had never met Mary Lou. She had never heard of the name Bader until the FBI confirmed the fingerprint match. Initially, Nancy told reporters that she would stay with him. She said that she believed in her husband and wanted to support him, but the pressure mounted. The story had made headlines, and reporters were now camped outside of their home. Investigators would contact her. Legal questions surfaced about the validity of their marriage, the custody of their children, and the financial implications of his reappearance. Within weeks, Nancy left. She moved out of their home in Omaha and declined further interviews. She was not attending court hearings, and she did not speak publicly again about the case. Lawrence's legal status as a husband became a central issue following his identification. His marriage to Nancy Zimmerman, who had only known him as John Fritz Johnson, was declared legally null and void because Lawrence had never been legally divorced from Mary Lou and had been declared dead in error. The original marriage remained valid under Ohio law. This created immediate complications. Nancy had married him in good faith, unaware of his past. Their union, though emotionally real, had no legal standing. Mary Lou, on the other hand, had been widowed by the courts and had received life insurance and Social Security benefits based on that ruling. With Bader now confirmed alive, her marital status reinverted, she was once again legally married to him, despite years of separation and no intentions to reunite. In Omaha was immediate and unforgiving. KETV, where Fitz had worked as a sports director and on-air personality, terminated his employment without delay. The station didn't issue a detailed public statement. His image was quietly removed from promotional materials. His name was no longer mentioned in broadcasts. The man who had once been invited to speak at fundraisers and civic events was now absent from the spotlight. With his television career over, Fritz returned to bartending. He had worked in bars when he first arrived in Omaha before moving on to radio and television. Now, nearly a decade later, he was back behind the counter. The income was modest, and he worked long hours. Patrons who recognized him from television sometimes asked questions. Others avoided the subject entirely. The man who had once been known for his flamboyant style and public charm now moved through Omaha quietly. The story had made headlines, the recognition lingered, the job was gone, and the spotlight had shifted. Legally, Bader had been ordered to pay child support to both of the women. According to reports, he paid $50 a week to Mary Lou for their 4 children and $20 a week to Nancy for the 2 children that they had raised together. His income had dropped significantly after losing his job at the TV station, and he was left with only $30 a week to live on. The payments were court-mandated and reflected legal recognition of his responsibilities to both families. Legal experts reviewed the implications of a man being simultaneously responsible for 2 households, one through a legally binding marriage and the other through a voided but long-standing domestic partnership. The courts upheld the child support obligations to both women, citing the welfare of the children and the financial history of the case. The overall public reaction was skeptical. The idea that a man could vanish and reappear under a new name, build an entirely new life, and claim to have no memory of his past was met with disbelief. Reporters pressed him for details. Viewers who had watched him on television questioned how someone so publicly visible could have maintained a fabricated identity for nearly a decade. The circumstances surrounding his disappearance, the storm warning, the missing oar, the suitcase, only added to the suspicion. Psychological evaluations were ordered. A team of psychiatrists examined him at the University of Nebraska Medical Center. The tests were extensive. They included memory assessments, personality inventories, and neurological screenings. The goal was to determine whether Bader had experienced dissociative amnesia or was deliberately concealing his past. The results were inconclusive. The psychiatrists found no evidence of mental illness. There was no history of psychiatric treatment, no signs of schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, or any other condition that might explain a complete identity break. He showed no signs of malingering. He answered questions consistently. He maintained that he was John Johnson and had no recollection of being Lawrence Bader. One theory speculated that the malignant tumor behind his left eye might have contributed to memory loss, but medical evidence offered little support for this claim. For a brain tumor to credibly cause amnesia, it would typically need to affect regions of the brain like the hippocampus, frontal lobes, or the left parasylvian network, areas deeply involved in memory formation, executive functions, and language processing. In his case, the tumor was not located in any of these critical zones. Moreover, while tumors can disrupt memory through pressure on surrounding tissues, inflammation, or interference with neurotransmitters, none of these mechanisms were clearly at play. Logical evaluations failed to confirm either organic amnesia or deliberate deception, leaving the clinical picture frustratingly inconclusive. The absence of cognitive defects consistent with tumor-related memory impairments made the theory medically unlikely, though not entirely impossible. Ultimately, the case hovered in a gray zone between neurobiology and psychology with no definitive answer. The psychiatrists concluded that if Bader had experienced memory loss, it was not the result of a diagnosable mental illness. If he had fabricated his identity, he had done so without detectable psychological disturbances. The findings left the investigation, family members, and public with more questions than answers. Among the clinical records, dissociative fugue appears as a possible reference point. The condition involves a sudden travel or identity replacement accompanied by memory loss. Bader had vanished during a period of financial strain and reappeared under a new name in a different city. The duration of his case exceeds typical fugue episodes. The term remained in circulation among those reviewing the case. With dissociative fugue, a person may leave their home without packing. No destination, no plan. They may walk off of a job mid-shift, abandon a vehicle, or board a train with no memory of how they arrived at the station. They may speak clearly, interact normally, and show no signs of distress. They may introduce themselves with a name they've never used before, and they may believe that it is theirs. This is not a disappearance in the conventional sense. It is not a breakdown. It is not a psychotic episode. It is a psychological condition, and it is classified as a subtype of dissociative amnesia. It involves the sudden and unexpected loss of personal identity and autobiographical memory. The individual affected may travel far from familiar surroundings. They may adapt a new identity. They may function in society without any indication that anything is wrong. They may not even know that they're missing. The term originates from the Latin word fuga, meaning flight. It refers not to the physical escape, but to the psychological retreat. The mind, under extreme stress or trauma, severs itself from its own history. It discards the burden of memory, it abandons the continuity of self, and then it constructs a new version, one that is unburdened, disconnected, and unaware. During said fugue state, a person may appear calm. They may hold a conversation and secure employment, rent a room, and form relationships. They may not exhibit confusion, and they may not appear mentally ill. They may not be aware that anything has changed. This makes the condition difficult to detect. It is often discovered only when the fugue ends and the original identity suddenly returns. The memories may reemerge without warning. The person may find themselves in a place they don't recognize, surrounded by people they don't know, living a life they don't remember creating. There is no clear warning before a fugue state begins, and there is no reliable signal that it has ended. It is a condition that operates in silence. It's not dramatic or theatrical. It's not visible to those who aren't looking. And even then, it may not be recognizable. The earliest documented cases appear in the late 19th century, scattered across medical literature like anomalies that defy classification. In some cases, a man could be discovered living under a name he's never used before, unaware of his origins, and unable to recall his family, occupation, or the town he vanished from. Another person could be found hundreds of miles away, coherent and composed, yet entirely disconnected from his previous life. These cases were rare, but they disturbed the boundaries of psychiatric understanding. They didn't resemble madness, they didn't resemble illness, they just resembled erasure. Then, physicians struggled to define what they were witnessing. The individuals were not delusional, they weren't coherent, they were in fact lucid, articulate, and socially functional. What they lacked was continuity. Their memories had vanished. Their identities had been replaced. The term psychogenic fugue emerged as psychiatry began to separate mental illness from criminality and hysteria, and these cases didn't fit the molds that were available at the time. They were anomalies and difficult to explain. As psychology progressed, fugue was incorporated into disassociation studies and classified as abnormal psychology. Rare and unpredictable, it proved difficult to categorize and replicate in clinics. Though included in diagnostic manuals, its understanding remained very limited at the time. In the current edition of Diagnostic and Statistical Manuals of Mental Disorders, dissociative fugue is no longer listed as a standalone diagnosis. It is now classified as a feature of dissociative amnesia. This reflects its complexity and infrequency. It is not dismissed or forgotten, but it remains in the margins of psychiatric research, where certainty is elusive and cases are few. Duration of said episodes vary. Some last for hours, others extend for days or weeks or longer. The return of the original identity may be very abrupt and may occur in isolation or in response to external cues. When it happens, the person may find themselves in an unfamiliar surrounding with no memory of how they arrived. The fugue period is often lost. In some cases, fragments remain. In others, the entire experience is inaccessible mentally. Overall, the condition is typically linked to a psychological trauma. Severe stress, emotional conflict, and unresolved trauma may act as a trigger. The fugue response is not deliberate, it's not calculated. It's a protective mechanism initiated by the brain when conventional coping fails. The mind disconnects from the identity associated with the trauma. It does so to preserve function. It does so basically to survive. There is no medical design to restore the loss of identity. There are no prescriptions that can retrieve the erased memory. Treatment for dissociative fugue does not begin with a pill. It begins with recognition. The condition often remains hidden until the episode ends, or until someone close notices the fracture. The person affected may not seek help. They may not even know that help is needed. Even under this theory, there are still elements of the Bader-Johnson story that resist resolution, while the idea of a fugue state remains one of the top contenders for explanation. There are other details about the story that stir doubt. The question lingered in the wake of Lawrence Bader's reappearance: the timing, the choices, the precision with which a new life had been constructed. All of it invited scrutiny. In the public eye, the narrative didn't settle, it kind of shifted. The more it was examined, the more it seemed to fracture. In the spring of 1975, Lawrence Bader's financial situation was deteriorating rapidly. He owed the IRS approximately $20,000, a significant debt, especially for a man supporting a growing family on a salesman's salary. The amount had occurred over several years of unpaid taxes, and there was absolutely no indication that he had made arrangements to settle it. So, the IRS began to take notice and demand repayment. Bader's employment as a cookware salesman was based on commission, and while he was known to be personable and persuasive, That made the income inconsistent. He had taken out personal loans to cover household expenses, and records suggested he was behind on payments. The family, his wife Mary Lou and their 3 children, with a 4th on their way, relied heavily on his earnings, which was stretching thin. In addition to the IRS debt, Bader had recently taken out a life insurance policy. He paid the premium on the same day he rented the boat on Lake Erie. That detail would raise eyebrows. The policy was sizable enough to provide financial relief to his family in the event of his death, and Mary Lou eventually received said payout after he was declared legally dead in 1960. There were no signs that Bader had disclosed full extent of his financial troubles to his family at the time either. There were warnings the day of his disappearance as well. The boat rental owner had cautioned Bader against the approaching storm, but Bader paid little attention to this and instead just handed over a $15 deposit and requested that the boats be equipped with lights, though it was still early in the afternoon. Coulter, the boat rental owner, also noticed something odd. Bader was carrying a suitcase. This wasn't standard gear for a fishing trip. What was in the suitcase we'll never know because the suitcase wasn't found along with the boat. And it wasn't just the boat rental owner who had warned him either. The Coast Guard had also repeated the storm advisory. By morning, though, the boat had washed ashore, 5 miles from the launch port. There was damage to it, and the fishing tackle inside laid scattered across the floor. Both of the life jackets were still on board, and the oar was missing. The gas can was empty, and some reports noted that the fuel line had been purposely disconnected. This all gave way to the idea that perhaps his disappearance may have been planned. One of the details that led many to question Lawrence Bader's claim of amnesia was how he handled the fallout once his true identity was revealed. If he truly had no memory of his former life, why didn't he reclaim the $39,500 life insurance paid out that had gone to Mary Lou after he was declared legally dead? He never contested it. He never asked for it back. Instead, he quietly accepted the legal consequences of his reappearance. He was court-ordered to pay child support to both women, Mary Lou, his first wife, and Nancy, the woman he'd married under John Fritz Johnson, and the records show that he did comply. He paid $50 a week to Mary Lou and $20 a week to Nancy. After those payments, he was only left with $30 a week to himself, and these choices didn't align with someone who was trying to reclaim a lost life. They aligned with someone who was trying to manage one that he had built. He didn't fight the system. He didn't push back. He paid what was asked for and kept going. For many, that quiet compliance raised more questions than it did answers. When his identity was finally revealed, his reaction caught people off guard. He didn't argue. He didn't deny the fingerprint match. He seemed genuinely stunned. Family members described him as confused and overwhelmed, as if the truth had landed on him from a distance that he couldn't quite measure. He just said, "Sorry, I must be Lawrence Bader." And that was it. That moment led some to consider more complicated possibility. It was not deception, it was not just amnesia, but something in between, like a hybrid. Maybe he had deliberately walked away from his old life in 1957. Maybe he had planned it. But over time, the new identity, John Fritz Johnson, became more than just a cover. It became real to him. He wasn't pretending anymore. He was genuinely living it. And there were signs that supported this idea. The never trying to reclaim the insurance money. He didn't fight legal consequences. He paid child support for both women. That kind of response didn't look like someone trying to get away with something. It looked like someone who had already let go of the life he had left behind. Confirmed in early 1965, Lawrence Bader didn't return to live with either Mary Lou in Akron or Nancy in Omaha. He remained in Omaha, but he no longer shared a home with Nancy. The marriage had been annulled. He lived alone, and there's no record of him entering another relationship after that. Contact with his children was limited. Mary Lou's 4 children had grown up without him. Nancy's daughter and son had only known him as Fritz. After the truth came out, there was no public reconciliation, no documented visits, no photographs, no interview. There were private moments, but they weren't recorded. The cancer had also returned within months, and it spread aggressively. He was admitted to St. Joseph Hospital in Omaha, and by late summer of 1966, he was no longer working. The illness had taken over, and he died September 16th in 1966 at the age of 39. The cause was listed as complications from cancer, and there was no autopsy. And her children held a funeral in Omaha. The body was sent to Akron, where Mary Lou and her children buried him. There were 2 headstones placed, one in Nebraska marked John F. Johnson, and one in Ohio marked Lawrence Joseph Batter. So did Lawrence Batter live a full life? That depends on which life you're asking about. The man who vanished from Fort Erie left behind a wife and 4 children, and a mountain of debt. The man who surfaced in Omaha rebuilt a new identity, married again, raised more children, and became a minor celebrity. But when those 2 lives collided, neither seemed entirely whole. Was it all a scam? A calculated escape from financial ruin? Or did something deeper inside of him fracture, something that allowed him to believe the lie long enough for it to feel true? He never tried to reclaim the insurance money. He never reconciled the relationships. He paid child support to both families, and he lived alone. He died young, and he left behind 2 headstones, each bearing a different name. Maybe we'll never know who he really was. Maybe he didn't know either. But the story leaves us with a question that lingers long after the facts are laid bare. Could you walk away from everything you've known and become someone else? Not just for a moment, but for a lifetime. Could you build a new life so completely that the old one fades like a dream? Some paths are chosen, others are escaped, and sometimes the light that guides you forward is not the same one that casts your longest shadow. I'm Amanda Joy, signing off. Until next time, keep your eyes on the road and your light close. Thanks for wandering down the crooked path with me. If you're drawn to the eerie, the macabre, and the stories time tried to forget, you'll feel right at home here. Whether it's folklore, forgotten rituals, or the strange corners of history, there's always another twist in the path. And every post is a breadcrumb deeper into the beautifully unsettling. Follow at Down the Crooked Path on TikTok and Instagram for more haunting visuals, behind-the-scenes lore, and sneak peeks into upcoming episodes. And if you're craving even more chills, come check me out over at Canadian Creepies, where I co-host with Val. It's true crime with a northern twist, and Down the Crooked Path has its own Tuesday segment, diving into the more paranormal side of Canada. Stay curious and keep wandering.